Wasn't until I was like 12 years old. I mowed a lady's yard in the neighborhood, and she said, "I don't have the money to pay you the $5. Will you accept some records?" So I was like, "Sure, I'll take some records."
No way. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I was like, I don't have any records. I don't have any to play them on. She says, "Well, I have a Ward's Airline. It was a suitcase record player that pulls down, had the two detachable speakers, and she gave me 5 Beatles out, and this is what started me off. So lo and behold, I find this $15. It's about right. It's right in the ballpark what it should be worth without that song on it. And then when I open it up, it happens to be a white label promo. These are sent to the radio stations to say, "Hey, this is our new band. They're Kiss. You may or may not like them. Listen to the album and see what you're gonna play."
That
so
is
this
crazy.
album, yeah, it is crazy. I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
No, I bet. Looking over your shoulder the whole time to see if anybody recognized it.
Exactly.
All right, Ray Thompson, you are a music fan, but you're also a collector, and not just of music, but we're just going to talk about music today. You have, as we can see here, a fair collection of vinyl. What was it that got you into collecting vinyl? And what was your first disc?
So basically, my family didn't have a lot of records. I think, well, I'll tell you for sure, I do have, and I save everything. I can't say I'm a hoarder. The girlfriend says it's not hoarding if it's cool. So
right.
that's what that's
how
we
live
over here. So this is actually the only record we had in my house as a kid. This is Joey Starlight, and it was the Peppermint Twist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's lame to be said, but we had this album. This is all we had. We had a record player we didn't use, so I never really got to hear. I mean, now I have it. I won't listen to it now, but it's been around forever. I might listen to it someday for nostalgic purposes. Yeah. But this is what we had. Otherwise than that, we just listened to the radio, and I really was into music. However, my neighbor, his parents had records. His parents had Elvis records, and they had Everly Brothers. Yeah. And we knew each other since we were early, so 5, 6 years old. So we go to their house, and they'd have music at their house. And it got me into music. It got me into, more like that's a record. And my grandparents had records, but they were all Mills Brothers. As I introduced into Mills Brothers, into like basically that kind of thing, my grandfather had a lot of Mills Brothers. Wasn't until I was like, I think 12 years old, 10 or 12 years old, somewhere around there. I mowed a lady's yard in the neighborhood, and she said, "I don't have the money to pay you the $5. Will you accept some records?" So I was like, "Sure, I'll take some records."
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I was like, I don't have any records. I don't have any to play them on. She says, "Well, I have a Ward's Airline suitcase." It was a suitcase record player that pulls down, had the two detachable speakers, and she gave me 5 Beatles albums to go with it. So she gave me 5 original. This is one of them. I still have all 5 of them, and this is one that she gave me, and this is what started me off. So I had these, played them to death on that thing. Yeah. And so I realized when I was that age that record player was going to kill him. It's like putting a steak knife into him,
right?
But I still have them all, and they're still in the collection. And
that's awesome.
As far as what I bought, the first thing I bought, not too long after that, there used to be like thrift shops in Longmont, but there was antique stores.
Yeah.
And antique stores would have a box of records or whatever. And oddly, the weirdest thing. I still have it. This is the very first album I ever bought my own money for $1.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
This is The Doors, "Waiting for the Sun."
Yeah.
So 1971 pressing. I didn't know any of this, but I looked at these guys on the front and I was like, "What is this about?" So this is what I took home. This is my actually first album I ever bought. I was probably 10 or 11 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, you started off with some pretty heavy hitters there for your collection.
Yeah, from the beginning, for sure, not knowing, as
right.
we went along, Yeah, and as time went on, as teenagers, we got record stores in town. We had a little bit more money, able to ride our bikes and go to that and pick up records. There was a place called Bananas in Longmont that we picked up. It was the north end of town. Picked up stuff there. Sometimes you got lucky, you got to go to Boulder and see I can't recall not Twin Peaks Mall in Boulder, Crossroads. And they had the Rocky Mountain Records and Tapes upstairs, and you could go up there and,
What was the name of that record joint that was in the basement right off of Pearl Street? You had to kind of duck your head to get into it, and I can't remember the name.
Oh, that was Albums on the Hill.
Yes.
Albums on the Hill. So Andy just closed his business last fall. He'd
Oh,
been there for about
really?
35 years. I
Yeah.
over the years go up there and visit him and stuff, and he finally
Amazing,
it's gone now
amazing
after
rare
all these years.
stuff over there.
I said I bought quite a few from him, of
Oh
course.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
It was
yeah.
interesting. I always, anytime I was looking for something rare or imported, that was the first place I went.
Oh yeah, he was really into like new bands and what have you.
Hmm.
He would really promote new bands, and he had a lot of great ideas for putting bands out there. In fact, one of the first times Matchbox 20 ever played was in front of his store about
Really?
less than a year before their first album came out.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, they played right in
Wow.
front of his store.
That's crazy. Well, and what a great location too. You know,
Yeah,
that
you'll pick
area
up those
was, yeah.
all the young. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially in the, I don't know how far back it goes, but I know in the 80s for sure, what a hot spot for local musicians.
Oh yeah, the Sink was up there, the Fox was up there,
Yeah.
and you had all those different little Talagis was up there. You had all these little bars you could play in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
you
all the
never know who
coffee
you're going to
shops
see.
and yeah.
Caribou Ranch was there. So
Yeah.
in the 70s, you would have people walking around Boulder like Stephen Stills and
Yeah.
Elton John, and
Yeah.
you
People
never who
flying
you'd
in to
run into.
record. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What an amazing, amazing scene over there. Of course, you didn't know this when you started, but what makes something collectible? What kind of defines a collectible vinyl these days?
Well, there's two ways of looking at collectible. It's your personal collectible is something you really enjoy. So
Hmm.
if you're buying records and say you're buying, oh, say you're into Aretha Franklin, and for you, the collectible is the actual part of doing that. Other people have a monetary
Yeah.
collectible to it.
Right.
And so there's kind of different ways of looking at it. So you're looking at like a monetary. I don't really go for that myself, but I do like to find stuff that's very hard to find.
Yeah.
For stuff so I get myself in these. Like I definitely have like one of my newest ones I've got picked up lately called you ever
Oh,
Train.
yeah.
This is
Yeah.
the light.
Hmm.
So this actually is limited to 500 pressings, and it was you had to get it through their website.
Ah,
So it's really hard to find. And I was
yeah.
pretty excited when I finally got one I found for sale because nobody
Yeah.
wants to sell them.
Right.
So
Sure.
I mean, so it makes it super collectible. That's one thing that makes them collectibles, like I say, the rarity of them,
Yeah.
and then the pressings can make them rare. You have
Okay.
early pressings with different labels,
Hmm.
and you have some like Led Zeppelin has one that's mastered by a different person, their second album. So that's really collectible. So they call it they call it the RL. So the RL, so you look on the dead wax and you find the RL in there. So
Yeah.
it sounds completely different. Same songs, but it's completely mixed different. So
Interesting. How do you find that kind of stuff?
right, you dig and you hope and you put in the back of your mind. Unfortunately, nowadays going to dig for stuff isn't like it used to be. You
Yeah.
used to be able to pick up something and like I don't know this band, so I'm going to take it home for $3
Yeah.
and check it out. Nowadays, it's like that's $20, so it makes it little different that you're going to take it home for twenty
Yeah.
dollars and
The
hate it.
risk factor is different for sure.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
just don't want to, before you could pick up something crazy and you go home and you're like, this is great. And other times it's like, this is going to go in the pile to take to the record store to get my dollar back, hopefully,
Right.
or my
Right.
$3 back,
Right. Well,
So,
or you could do what a lot of folks did. Some of my relatives actually did this, but it was a thing in the late 60s to mid 70s to turn records into ashtrays.
oh, I've
And
seen that, or bowls. Yeah,
yeah, or bowls. So you get something you don't like. Well, now I got a bowl.
exactly.
Here's my candy
Exactly.
bowl or my key bowl or whatever.
Oh, no key bowls. Yeah.
You collect, obviously you collect some rare stuff, some hard to find stuff. You also collect stuff that is real popular, real obvious it would be collectible, and you collect stuff that maybe wouldn't be so obvious, that maybe a band didn't have any hits.
Yeah.
Why such a wide range of collectability outside of the fact that you're a music lover?
Well, a lot of times like with an album will give you that cover will draw you in. You may
Gotcha.
not know anything about it. Today, you can go to YouTube and you can kind of give yourself a little bit of a step up from what
Yeah.
it used to be. But if you see an album cover and you're like, hey, that looks pretty interesting, you take
Yeah.
it home and it could be completely one night and day.
Yeah.
This album cover looks great and put it on and you're like, what is this? It's
Right.
like, it doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, that's the thing is, like you say, I collect the normal stuff as well. I have a lot of normal stuff that people go through. I have your basic Beatles everybody collects, and David Bowie, and then
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But I also collect like I really like the oddball, like Garage and Psych from the '60s. It's always just a different. I mean, it's kind of there's a
Yeah.
few that are easy to find, but for the most part, when you come across them, which you don't anymore, but the electronic day has made it easier, so
Yeah.
you can get on eBay and find
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to pay the money, you can have that record. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the give there.
Yeah.
But to find them in the wild is the best. You can go in
Yeah,
the
for
wild and
sure.
you're looking through a record store and you're going through and you surprise yourself because sometimes you don't even know the thing exists. So you'll be going through and
Yeah.
you're digging through. You can't know everything, of course.
Right.
You're digging through records and here you find Bo Diddley's surfing record and you're like, well, how can you not want that?
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't know it existed. So
Yeah.
here it is.
You have been in probably almost every record store along the Front Range, I'm guessing.
Oh yes, I have
Um,
in several states.
so do you get kind of a feel for what the owner is going to have in inventory?
I do.
Yeah.
Exactly. I know the record stores that I don't unfortunately don't go to anymore. However, because they're all they're featuring anymore is sealed reissues that you can buy on at Walmart or you could buy them on
Oh,
Amazon.
sure.
And I do like to support a local music store, brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm.
But when I go in there and they've got because they're not making much on the record. If they've got it for unfortunately records are upwards of $30 to $50 now. If you do look back at that, you see a record, say in 1966 was say $5. If you do the math, the $5 isn't much different than the $30 today.
Yeah. And do you
It,
still
it,
like to get the new stuff on vinyl if you can?
I do,
Yeah.
and
The hard copy stuff is a lot more profitable for them than the digital stuff for sure. When you do collect, I've always loved the fact that you support the new guy, the opener, the local scene. I've always thought that was so incredible. A lot of people only want the rare stuff of the big guys. Well, and that's fine, and there's some things to be said for that, but they don't need you to buy their album, and
no,
and the
no,
little guy really depends on that sometimes.
yeah,
Uh,
you find something new, like something you've never heard before,
yeah.
like Gregory Alan Isaacoff. You're familiar with him.
Uh-uh.
So he's basically out of Boulder, that kind of Netherland area.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
started listening to his stuff about 15, 20 years ago. And I've got all that, like I say, a completist. I've got all his albums except for
Yeah.
the brand new one,
Yeah.
but a little guy, he's got his own record label. He's got his, he's
Yeah.
all on his own, he's putting
Yeah.
that stuff out. So I'm more than welcome. I'm more than, I'll buy them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I enjoy it
Absolutely.
too. Not
Yeah.
just to buy it, but I really enjoy it too.
Yeah.
So
And that's just icing on the cake when you're a collector, isn't it?
yeah. So it's yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. You just led into the next thing I was going to mention, and that is that you're a completist. Does that apply across the board?
My crazy mind is what happens with that. I get to I start thinking of something. And I think to myself, I was sitting here one day listening to records, and I was listening to, in the '80s, you've got like Billy Ocean has like
Yeah.
5 or 6 number one hits,
Yeah.
and you think to yourself, did he really have 5 or 6 number one hits? I'm like, who else had number one hits in the '80s? So
Right.
I get up the old Billboard, Billboard. And I'm looking through it, and I'm like, oh, here's Duran Duran. Here's all
Yeah.
the people you're
Yeah.
going through that. And I thought, what would it take to get every album
Oh my gosh.
of the '80s, with the number one hit on it, like this, November of '86,
Yeah.
January of '88,
Yeah.
So I went back through and I went through and for about 8-10 months, I finally got them all. So that brings us to when you have things like this in your collection. Michael Damon, you remember this guy?
Yeah.
He sings "Rock On" is the album. It's
Yeah.
that darn yellow. That light's killing me, but you can look it up and see the song. And you're like, either you remember it, and you're like, oh yeah, that played every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's always been the case, but it seems like there's been periods in time where there are more one-hit wonders. So you had a bunch of number one hits, and then you never heard from those people again. And so if you're going to collect all their stuff, you might not even know they have 6 albums because they only had one hit.
That's normal of everything. Of all those, a lot of those bands are like that.
Wow.
They have a contract with a record label, and
Right.
they might have 3 to 6 albums on that contract. If they're lucky enough for the first album, I think, to actually have something to hit. If it takes 2 or 3, they usually don't stick around long
That's
enough.
right. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's really true. You 3 strikes, you're out for sure with the labels. They'll quit pushing you.
I think in the '60s more you had a chance to put stuff out. in the 70s, I think most of the big guys, EMI, all those places
Mhm.
bought all those little labels, bought all the
Right.
contracts, so they were more apt to like weed you out quicker. It was
Yeah.
distribution that was the worst part. If
Right.
you didn't have, if you
Right.
couldn't just distribute it more than your local area, you were a smoldering flame. You were,
Right. Well, and isn't it interesting? And like you were saying, in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, you had a lot of regional superstars,
yes, very much.
and so for them to break into a national scene, was so difficult. But if you did, then you knew that you were in.
Yeah, you were in. You were in. You were saved.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the regional stuff was great until everybody and their brother had seen your show at the fair 10 times, you know.
Right, exactly. And now you're kind of
So
done unless you had,
yeah.
something going on.
What I find interesting in this, I'm getting off track here, but is how the vinyl medium continues to cycle.
Hmm.
It kind of waxes and wanes, but it never really goes away.
No.
Um, and I think that's really fascinating, especially with how hard technology tries to continually push forward. Um, the vinyl just keeps hanging on, which I love, but it's such a strange thing to witness because why is that?
Well, nowadays, what they do nowadays is they have audiophile records. They
Mm-hmm.
do records on 180-gram vinyl that are heavier, so the sound is more clean than ever. I have a few
Um,
records in here, like I have an Alison Krauss album that
mhm.
to listen to it, you just feel like you're sitting right here with her. It's a audiophile, and it's absolutely amazing. And you can listen to it on YouTube or whatever, Spotify, and you would never. It's completely different. I know people always
Yeah.
say vinyl sounds different, but something like that, where that quality of a pressing,
Yeah.
you can't beat it. You just
Yeah.
can't. It's unbelievable the way it sounds. And I think they mass produce a lot now, so some of them get kind of like, let's just put out as many as we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we try for the best quality we can, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And they're putting out a lot of stuff nowadays that I don't agree why they're putting it out. I mean, I don't think we need the whole Dan Fogelberg collection on brand new albums. I mean, granted, he's a great artist. I listen to him myself. I
Yeah.
have I have originals back here, but they're $3 to $8 a piece of the originals. When you're
Yeah.
paying $20-$25 for a reissue, I'm not about it.
I wonder if some of that, and this is maybe for another time, and it's very, very subjective, but I don't want to say the quality of the artist, but the quality of the product that's being put out today. Well, there's still some amazing stuff, and there always has been, there probably always will be. When you look at it in mass, there's a lot of just cookie cutter. How many dollars can we rake in? How quickly? And there have been periods in time where, especially with the rock scene of the 70s, where there was so much, it wasn't being as mass produced, and the stuff that you were getting, every single album stood on its own as a completely different sound. And so I wonder if some of these labels, well, and also maybe some copyright stuff, but if some of these labels that own these albums are like, there was an audience for this back in the day, and this doesn't sound like anything that's out now. Maybe we can get another couple 100,000 sales out of it.
Well, everything's old is new again, just like they
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So kids will listen to these albums, and they'll come out with these albums, and some of the albums that you're looking for in the original form are too expensive or too hard to find. Mostly it's hard to find.
Yeah.
I know that my stepson, he's into Bowie and he's into Tom Waits,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
luckily for him, there's me. So
Right.
I have extra, or I have a secondary copy of this Tom Waits album that I can
Yeah.
give to him.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he has to go and buy a new copy because they're basically really hard to find in the wild. And if you do find them, they know it's cost and demand, so
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody's looking for that album. So it's going to be $100
Yeah.
easy. And that's the way it is right now, is they know people are looking for it. It's really like everything. It's going to be expensive.
Yeah. Are a lot of these reissues also remastered?
A lot of them, well, not all of them, but they have listed that they're remastered. They'll have
Yeah.
box sets that come out nowadays, and they'll have them. Mostly that's what I see. I see box sets that are
Mhm.
remastered.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in them. I don't want to pull the trigger on them.
Right.
It's not enough for me to pull the trigger to buy it.
Yeah.
If it's 70, $80 when I have, like I say, probably sitting behind me, and I can listen to the original one.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do a lot of remastering. They clean them up quite a bit. I just some of them they don't.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it takes away from the magic of the recording.
Right. I think they should leave it the way it is.
Yeah.
I think they might be able to clean it up a little bit so there's a different depth to it, but not take away things from it.
Yeah.
Maybe
Right. Yeah.
more of a depth to it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really true. What is more important when you're collecting, quantity or quality? Like, is it more important that you have a complete collection of, say, Bowie, or do you really just want this one album in the best condition you can find? Or is that even something that you consider? Is it kind of a take it
Quality
as you
goes for
come?
yeah. Quality is that's one thing. Is take it as it comes. Quantity is something that if you're not super eclectic, you're going
Mhm.
to end up with fewer, of course. If you don't
Sure.
like if you can't listen to Debbie Gibson and Metallica, you're
Yeah.
going to have a
Yeah.
lot less records.
Yeah.
I listen to everything, so and then they give everything a chance. In their catalog.
Yeah.
If I enjoy one of them, I say maybe I'll enjoy the second one or the third one. So a lot of people don't collect everything like I do. I see a lot of people collect country records
Right.
or classical. So of course it narrows theirs down.
Yeah.
Quality, I do enjoy to find records. I just found a Rubber Soul album last weekend, original '66 pressing. That's the best copy I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
You think it was pressed the day before I found it, and so I
Really?
did buy it. I don't need it, but I had to buy it because it
Yeah.
was just like unbelievable. But a lot of times I find that if you decide that, hey, that's not that great in great condition, you better think about if you're ever going to see one again. So
Yeah.
I go through something and I've left several in my life that I still think about. That I think
Yeah.
I should have grabbed that because I've never seen another one since.
Right.
So um, if they're overpriced, I do leave them. If they think that this album, which is rare, but it's beat to death, I'm
Right.
gonna leave it.
Yeah.
But if it's a decent price or like a steal, as they say, I might take it. Just is
Yeah.
I'll take it and hope for the best when I
Right.
get home. I'll clean the record,
Yeah.
and go through the motions of cleaning it up and try to get as best I can out of it. But yeah, I think I have my quantity somewhere around 8,000 right now.
That's
But
awesome.
like I say, I listen to everything from, I've got everything from acapella to anything in this room. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
get
that
I get an itch for something, or I hear something on TV, on a movie, and I'm like, I'm gonna go listen to that album after.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. When you're collecting too, the quality versus quantity thing, do you look at the vinyl and the cover when you consider that? Or if one is great and the other one isn't, is it still a consideration to buy?
Well, in my back of my mind, I say you can't play the cover. So if the cover is ratted or
Mhm.
torn, the only thing I don't go for is I don't go if it's got the mold on it because mold will ruin this whole area.
Right.
Mold is not the way to go. So I've passed on some with mold. I've
Yeah.
been given collections from people that bring them over and they'll say here's a bunch of records and they'll end up in the trash can because I can't even bring them in the house. I
It
just
spreads
don't know
that
what's gonna.
easy, huh? Wow.
It does. It spreads that easy, so they all go away. But most of the time, it's the record itself. It's because I say you can't play the cover,
Yeah.
so I the record I can always put in a different sleeve or look for a different sleeve. And myself, I've got a whole box downstairs of sleeves with no records because
Oh,
that's
interesting.
the way it goes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes I'll get a bad record and I'll say, you know what, I'm gonna save this Prince, Purple Rain sleeve. You
Yep.
never
Yep.
know.
Yeah.
So I have some downstairs that just might work for something else.
Right. How important is album art to collectability?
For a buyer or for a novice going out there to look for stuff, seeing something on that catches your eye,
Yeah.
which is for somebody who doesn't know your music or your to catch your eye and to say, hey, what is this?
Hmm.
It's weird because you look at the White Album, but they're the Beatles, so they don't have to worry about what's on the front. It's
Right.
all a White Album.
Right.
So, but for eye catching ability, like something on that, it really helps.
Yeah.
It really helps to draw people in.
Well, and I don't know, I haven't ever looked into it, but I know the 70s, late 60s, like 68 to 75, 77, maybe, album art took on a life of its own. You
Yeah, it
had
did.
Zeppelin and Yes and Boston, where they were really creating an identity through their art as well as their sound.
Right.
I especially, because I'm a huge Yes fan, I especially think of Yes with Roger Dean's artwork. You know, sometimes had nothing at all to do with the music, but a lot of people would buy the album because the album art was so incredibly well done.
Yeah, that would be Santana the same
Yep.
way. Santana's artwork is incredible. His first
Yeah.
album is just amazing. That whole that lion on the front and what have you. And here's an interesting fact: is some of the albums done in the '70s were done by Phil Hartman, who was on Saturday Night Live.
Really
You can go back and look at,
interesting.
yeah. So he did like the Aja album from Steely Dan. And
Really?
yeah, if you go back and look at some of the,
Wow.
look it up on the internet and check out,
Yeah.
Phil Hartman. So he was, I think he was like a art major, and he
Interesting.
did, yeah, so he was in college. He did several albums. So you go back and look, and you'll see, wow, I had no idea he did so many albums. And then he's like, one day I'm going to be a comedian instead.
Isn't
And
that
wouldn't that be
crazy?
nice to have that idea in your head?
Oh, to be
Just
able to
like,
make that switch and be
yeah,
and still be
exactly,
successful.
exactly. Here, I'm going to do this instead. That's enough of
Wow.
that,
That's
But
crazy, especially to
yeah,
have
that's it.
some albums like that under his belt.
Right. And I mean,
Yeah.
multi-million dollar or multi-million selling albums you have,
Yeah.
ready to go, it's pretty neat,
Yeah.
you
That's
know.
amazing. Yeah. I had no idea. That's crazy because I know that you and I have talked about how there'd be multiple releases of the same album or the same 45 with different covers. So that actually leads me to two questions. One is, does that make the cover then collectible even if you've already got the vinyl? And what was the purpose behind multiple releases? Was it a regional thing? You get a different cover in Germany than you do in England.
That's def that's definitely it. You have the same 45, so you have a Hound Dog. You've
Yeah.
got a Portuguese cover, you got a French cover, a German cover.
Yeah.
And into the 60s, early 60s, you had compact 33s to play on jukeboxes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they'd be like a small album. So you'd have so it'd have a different cover than
Interesting.
everything else. So that when I showed you the other day was a compact 33
Yeah.
of the
Okay.
Elvis record. They did EPs too, which again, these are records that came out in the '70s and '60s,
Mm-hmm.
and they have 4 songs, they had 2 songs on
Yeah.
each side.
Yeah.
And this is something. This is I really love to collect these EPs. I've got all the Buddy Holly ones. I've collected Chuck Berry's, and they're hard to find, and they do
Yeah. I
cost you
bet.
money when you find them. You
I
know,
bet. Yeah. What was the purpose of those? I mean, I know in the 80s and early 90s, you had the maxi singles and you had extended
but
plays and all that stuff, but that was largely, I think, motivated by medium change. You had digital and you had all these other things to play on. But what was the
right.
motivation for EPs in the 50s and 60s?
Well, see, they had so what you had was that basically in the '50s you would have people collected 45s.
Yeah.
Young people collected 45s, not albums. Albums were basically your parents would collect the Perry Comos
Oh,
and the
oh,
Mitch Millers.
gotcha. Yeah, sure,
So
sure. Because you were looking for
so
singles then in the 50s,
right. So
the
kids were
hit
all about
songs.
hit songs. A side, B side, flip sides.
Yeah, yeah,
In 1948, RCA came out with the first thing called the home jukebox. So it was like it was just a regular tabletop record player that just played 45s, had a fat spindle on it,
hmm,
and you could put several on there. And as you probably have seen that,
yep,
the third or
yep.
fourth one plays slow because you're losing traction by that time.
Right, right.
So, so that's what. So these were able to give you 2 songs on each side, so you were able to listen to even more.
Okay,
So,
okay.
but in the '60s, if you look at the '60s, and 45 sales went down, and when the Beatles came, album sales rose back up. So they had less 45s out there. So
Yeah,
albums were more prolific out there. People bought albums instead of 45s.
yeah. Interesting, interesting. What time period do you tend to collect the most?
Oh, the most is probably the '50s and '60s.
Yeah.
Is the because there's so much out there. There's so many different genres that you can collect. You've
Hmm.
got Motown, you've got the psych, you got the garage, you got surf, you've got
Yeah,
all the great country western stuff with like the Merle Haggards and
yeah.
the Loretta Lynn and all that early stuff.
Hmm.
So I mean that's from the in the '60s, the '50s you have the doo wop stuff,
Yeah,
and you have the Eddie James soul. There's so many different things out there, and so
yeah.
many great artists like Sam Cooke.
Yes.
You can't beat a Sam Cooke album.
Yeah.
You know, come home one night angry as can be and throw some Sam Cooke on and you're ready to go,
Go.
you know? So
um, when is that partly motivated by what you grew up listening to, do you think? Or is
I
it,
think so. I
yeah,
think so. I think it's on Sunday mornings we listen to whatever oldie station it was. I think it might have been Kim or something back
yeah,
when I was a kid,
yeah,
and we listened to that, and then the oldies were on, and that's what my parents knew. And of course,
okay,
us of that age, that's where
yeah.
we're at. You know, it's like
Did
everything's
you ever
peppered in, but
did,
it's
did you
not
ever
the
listen to
same.
the Wolfman?
Yeah, well, you mean the Boogeyman on was that or
Okay,
the
so
Wolfman Jack?
okay, Wolfman Jack is what I meant to say. Yeah,
Yeah, Wolfman Jack. Yeah,
yeah,
yep. Yeah, I've listened to quite a bit of his stuff. I have
yeah,
some of his albums that they did some on air
yeah,
recordings,
yeah, yeah.
and I've
Oh,
got a
that's cool.
couple of those.
That's really
And
cool.
recorded oddly through the Air Force, so the Air Force albums.
Oh,
So he
interesting.
must have been on Armed Forces radio sometime.
Yeah,
I
that
don't know
makes sense.
exactly what the situation with that is, but
Yeah,
yeah, I've collected a few of those
yeah,
oddball. Like I have this, I can't leave
yeah,
this here because I'll never see it again.
yeah,
You
for
know.
sure. In your collecting, we talked about stuff that you find once in a while that is really rare and stuff. Have you ever come across a surprise when you were looking for something and you see something else? You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that these were available anymore.
Yeah, so I do have a couple of them like that. This is a I can see it with the
Oh yeah,
bright.
yeah.
So this is Kiss's first album and it's his debut album. And let me pull this out real
What a
quick here.
great album cover too.
Yeah, it's a great album cover. It's Casablanca, who pretty much risked their whole record, uh, whatever you want to say, their whole selves on these guys. They
Wow.
risked everything on these guys until not till the late '70s when they started doing disco with the Donna Summer
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
Village People. They were
Yeah.
able to put peanut butter on the bread too instead
Right.
of just you know. But I was looking for
Oh,
this
funny.
album for a long time, and there's two variants of this album. There's this the original one came out. The second version came out, or second pressing came out, has a song called "Kiss Time," and so their producer was the same producer as Bobby Rydell from
Oh,
the early
really?
'60s,
Yeah.
and he had a song. He had a little cutesy song called "Kissin' Time" that did somewhat okay for him, you know. But
Yeah.
because this album was kind of tanking, he just said the best thing for them to do was to cover that Bobby
Really?
Rydell song as Kiss, doing "Kissin' Time." Terrible idea. So so everybody looks for this album that doesn't have "Kissin' Time" on it. So this is
Right.
so I looked for one forever, right? So lo and behold, I find this $15. It's about right. It's right in the ballpark what it should be worth without that song on it. And then
Yeah.
when I open it up, it happens to be a white label promo. Now these are the ones that
Oh
are
my
sent to
gosh.
yeah. So
Yeah.
these are sent to the radio stations to say, hey, this is our new band. They're Kiss. You may or may
Yeah.
not like them. Listen to the album and see what you're gonna play.
That
So
is
this
crazy.
album, yeah, it is crazy. I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
No, I
You know,
bet. Yeah.
I
Looking over your shoulder the whole time to see if anybody recognized it.
exactly because these ones go on pop site. If you look online, these ones started about $1,400 and work themselves up from there.
And I don't know if you know about this genre or not, but I know that kind of the transition from vinyl into the digital format in the electronica scene was really interesting because a lot of the house music never really got away from vinyl. But what they did was started combining their vinyl stuff with the digital stuff, especially with, the big push in the late 80s and early 90s of the 808 albums and the 303 albums, where you had tons of bass boost that just didn't translate well on vinyl. Now you could crank all day long on CD.
Right.
And so you had DJs that were doing CD and vinyl turntabling. Do you think that market is what kind of helped keep vinyl afloat until the resurgence? Was the club scene?
Yeah, I think so because you're going to have DJs who demand that,
Yeah.
and DJs who have a following. I mean, people think like DJs, they don't realize that DJs how big they were in larger markets.
Oh yeah.
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 I mean, if you're looking at
Especially in
DJ,
Europe,
well, yeah,
I think
you've
Americans
got
have no idea how big they are in Europe.
right. I don't myself. I don't have any idea, but I know like you look at club scenes like in L.A.
Hmm.
and say New York and what have you. For the whole for as long as it's been, they've had albums pressed, which
Yeah.
kept the which kept places open. Their pressing plants. There's not very many pressing plants anymore. They
Right.
all closed down because there wasn't that demand anymore.
Yeah.
Now they're starting to pick back up, of course, in the last 5 8 years. Now they're
Yeah. It
now
really
they're
has. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of stuff doesn't get sold. It doesn't get picked up
Yeah.
because there's a very small amount of artists. I mean, I could see you or me picking up stuff. Like we
Yeah.
could pick up like some Lena Horne, or we
Oh,
could pick
yeah.
up some, the things like that we could pick up. But we're as far as like some of the stuff is just going to be unfortunately thrown out. I mean, I
Yeah.
have some real nice pressings of some Doris Day stuff, and that's because people that of that era kept everything clean. they
Yes.
they took care of everything. So whenever I find like a Letterman album, I don't want it, but it's so clean I can't see it getting thrown away. So I have a whole bunch back here in this
Yeah.
section over here. I have a whole bunch of I don't know what you want to call them, easy listening, or I don't know what you want to
Yeah.
call them, but I
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
bunch. What do we do with them now? I'm kind
Yeah.
of done with this,
Yeah.
because I think that people, younger kids nowadays, don't have the whole follow it forever. You know what I'm saying?
That is
Something
so true. Yeah. Everything is disposable. Yeah.
disposable. Everything's right
Yeah.
now, bam, and then it's not my thing anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not drinking White Claw anymore. I'm drinking
Right.
this. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Um, Going back to being a completist, you mentioned the Letterman, and I don't remember the name of the group, but the bass for Manhattan Transfer, Tim Hauser, had a quartet similar to the groups like the Letterman prior to Manhattan Transfer that had a fair amount of success. Do you ever go in your collection, if you're collecting, as an example, Manhattan Transfer, you've got their whole collection? Do you ever look outside of that and go, okay, what did Alan Paul do outside of Manhattan Transfer? What did Tim Hauser do outside of Manhattan Transfer, and collect those as well?
oh, definitely. I'll go back and find different bands they were in, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like Billy Idol, he was in Generation X.
Yeah.
So I went back and picked up their albums and see how that was, and you could just tell it's one step away from a high school band. But
Right.
they were just here we are. This is our goal. We're not
Yeah.
being nobody's telling us no.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, he's Billy Idol, and the
Yeah.
rest is history.
Yeah.
You know. But I do like to go back and find albums. You can use a bunch of them. There could be Huey Lewis has got a band before he was in the news.
Sure. Yeah.
Billy Joel was in the Hassles. He was in Nutella.
Hmm.
I've got all those albums. Billy Joel was in those albums, and yeah, I do enjoy that. And I say they go back and look, and for the most part, to have success in a band prior, like prior to what you're like, if you're known for the Manhattan Transfer,
Yeah.
and to have success in something prior to that is pretty odd because
Yeah.
I mean, any of the bands I collect or any of the records I collect of an artist in that band that was beforehand, usually you listen to it and you're like, okay, I can see this as a stepping stone. If you look at
Right.
like Winds in the Willow with Deborah Harry from '69,
Yeah.
that album, you can
Yeah.
hear her in there, you can hear something's going on, but I mean,
Yeah.
she's not Blondie yet. Give her
Right.
10 years and she's
Right.
she's gonna be rolling.
I remember hearing Blondie on the radio,
Mm-hmm.
and they would purposely, but they were huge disco fans, and so they would intentionally in their shows occasionally play a disco piece right in the middle of their punk set, just to tick off their audience, because the punk guys were not having disco, kind of like the rock guys were not having disco. And when they did the first Heart of Glass, it was more of a ballad, and they ended up with a new producer, and I can't remember his name now. When he heard that track, he was like, you guys are trying to make this a punkish type ballad, but this is a disco song, so just go for it. And they said, well, we can't because there's a cuss word in it. And so that's how it became Heart of Glass, was because they had to change some of the lyrics. And
Oh,
and he said, just go for it, go all out, go full disco, and that was their biggest hit.
yeah,
See, and
yeah,
just you never know.
yeah, it's a great album that's on.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
can't believe your
but
dad
they were,
bought.
considered some of the founders, the first punk groups, which I always thought was strange because they don't sound anything like the punk that you hear,
No, they don't.
3 or 4 years later.
but then of course you go to your punk and you punk or whatever, and you can break that down into, you can
True.
slice that off. You slice
Yeah,
that off into different, this kind of punk, that kind of punk.
that's
And so
true.
with every genre is the same way.
Yeah, that's very
You get,
true.
you
Yeah,
get your country western, but that's honky tonk country western, or
right.
that's ballad style country
It's
western, or
country
that's,
and western.
yeah, we got both kinds.
Well, let's wrap this one up. I would love to go into more detail on some of this stuff and talk, specific genres and specific collectibles that you have.
Sure.
But for now, let's leave it at that. That's a lot of information that we went through. Hopefully, we didn't
Right.
lose too many people with the names and the labels and everything.
Oh yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Sure. That was great. It was a great time.
Yeah.
Good talking to you again, for sure.
Yeah, you too. And we'll definitely have you on again.
All right, perfect.